Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to travel beyond the riverbanks where it happened. Most men will live their entire lives without ever hearing a story like this, and maybe that's for their own protection. But you're here because some part of you already suspects the world is built on secrets darker than night, older than governments, older than religion, older than law itself. Picture this: autumn, 1892. The river fog is so thick it feels like wool pressed against your face. The moon is nothing more than a dying coin behind the clouds. And on the water, silent, drifting without a single or stroke, is a cargo vessel everyone on that shoreline recognized, the Mary Ellen, a boat that wasn't supposed to return for another 12 days. But it came back early, and it came back wrong. The dockhands said the hull groaned like it was in pain, said the water around it smelled like something dead had been dragged for miles. And when the wind shifted, they swore they heard something beneath its planks, a faint tapping, the kind that chills a man even before he realizes why his spine is tightening. The captain stood alone at the bow. A tall, starved-looking man named Elias Crow, a man who had ferried goods across that river for 27 years without incident. He didn't tie the boat. He didn't wave. He didn't even breathe like a normal man. He just stared at the villages as if he had returned from a place no map had ever recorded. Then he spoke a single sentence that froze the entire dock: "Don't go beneath the hull." But he said it too late, because the river was already whispering, pulling the boat gently toward the bank, inviting them. The first man who stepped onto the deck said the wood felt warmer than it should, softer, almost like it had been alive just minutes before. And when they pried the lowest boards loose, lanterns trembling in their hands, what they found would scar the entire valley for generations. But before I reveal what lay beneath that rotten hull, now write in the comments which city and what time you are listening to us from, so we know who is absorbing this secret. Before the truth erupted, before anyone dared crawl under that cursed vessel, you need to understand the world these people lived in, because horror only becomes real when it intrudes on ordinary life. And in 1892, this riverside town was the closest thing to ordinary America you could imagine. It was a place where men woke before sunrise, where women hung laundry by the waterline, where the church bell dictated the rhythm of the day. Folks trusted their neighbors. Doors stayed unlocked. Children played near the docks without fear, chasing each other between crates of grain and barrels of salted fish. The river was their lifeline, a calm, predictable artery that had fed the town for decades. But calm rivers often hide ancient things, and predictable places often have the darkest underbellies. For months leading up to the day Elias Crow returned, a quiet dread had been crawling through the region. Children, not from one home, not from one family, but from scattered cabins along the water, had begun to vanish. No footprints, no broken windows, no ransom notes, just empty beds, and mothers screaming by dawn. At first, the town blamed the woods, wolves, drifters, the usual fears. But the disappearances followed the river like a shadow. Every missing child lived within sight or sound of the current. And the river, the same river that carried their food and their hope, began to feel like a monster with a mouth too large to see. Villagers whispered at the tavern about strange lights on the water at night, moving patterns beneath the surface, and the silhouette of a boat drifting without crew. Some claimed they heard children crying across the water long after midnight, soft, muffled, as if coming from somewhere deep. The sheriff sent letters to adjoining towns. The church held prayer vigils. Parents forbade their children from going outside after dusk. And then, as if mocking them, the Mary Ellen, the river's most respected vessel, returned without warning, its lanterns extinguished, its captain hollow-eyed, its hull groaning like a dying animal. Life, once ordinary, now stood on the edge of revelation, the kind that erases innocence in one brutal moment. And if you feel ready to take the next step and become part of this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Before I tell you what the men discovered beneath that rotting hull, you need to understand who commanded that boat, and what kind of past he carried on his back like a curse carved into bone. Elias Crow was not born a river captain. He was forged into one. He grew up on the banks of that same cold water, the son of a fisherman who drowned when Elias was 7, and a mother who vanished 2 winters later, leaving behind nothing but a torn shawl and a single muddy footprint facing the river. The town pitied him, but pity in small communities turns to suspicion fast. People whispered that the river kept an eye on him, that it favored him, that it spoke to him when nights were too quiet. Maybe that was just superstition. Or maybe it wasn't. By 17, Elias had memoized the river's moods better than any elder. He could read its currents the way scholars read books. He could sense storms before clouds even formed. The river accepted him, and that frightened people more than anything. So they gave him a boat. They gave him cargo. They sent him up and down the water because no one else wanted to tame a river that seemed awake. For decades, Elias Crow was known for reliability. No delays. No accidents. No questions. He ferried grain, coal, timber, livestock, and sometimes things no one ever recorded in the official ledgers. Rumors spread that he had government contracts. Others claimed he worked with a secret religious sect that mapped the spiritual geometry of American waterways. Some even said the river used him as an instrument, a pair of hands for things no human should do. Then came the sightings. People swore they saw Elias traveling at night with his lantern snuffed out. Other captains reported that the Mary Ellen moved against the current, drifting upriver without sails, without oars, without sound. And through all this, Elias never married, never took a partner, never brought a child into the world. Yet he always kept scraps of drawings in his cabin. Small hands, stick figures, little faces with hollow eyes. No one asked him who drew them. But after the children started vanishing, people began to wonder, was Elias Crow merely a witness to the river's hunger, or had he finally become part of its bargain? Now we descend into the part of the story where truth stops behaving like truth, where facts fracture, where every witness swears they saw something different, but all of their versions end in the same terror. The mystery began unfolding the moment the dockhands dared approach the underside of the Mary Ellen. Remember this, the boat had returned at dawn, yet the boards beneath it were wet, not with river water, but with something thicker, something darker. The men knelt on the planks, lanterns trembling, listening for that faint tapping they'd heard earlier. Tap, tap. Then silence. Then a long, low scrape, like fingernails dragging across soaked wood. One man, Thomas Hale, claimed he heard breathing. Another insisted he heard whispering. A third said it sounded like humming, a child's lullaby broken into pieces. Their descriptions never matched. Fear never does. Fear custom fits itself to a man's weak points. Sheriff Nolan ordered them to pry a section of the lower deck open. As soon as the first nail came loose, the smell hit them, a suffocating sweetness, like spoiled fruit mixed with something human. The men gagged. One fainted. And yet they kept going, because curiosity can be more dangerous than any monster hiding in the dark. When the plank finally lifted, lantern light spilled downward into a narrow cavity no one knew existed. Officially, the Mary Ellen had no hidden compartments, no storage bunkers beneath the hull, no modifications. And yet here it was, a space large enough to hold a dozen bodies curled together. The first lantern revealed something moving, slowly, rhythmically, as if swaying with the river even when the boat itself was still. A fisherman at the scene said he saw ropes. Another claimed he saw hair. A third swore he saw small hands reaching up from the darkness before the lantern slipped and shattered on the deck, plunging everything into chaos. Men screamed. Some ran. The sheriff shouted for order, but even his voice cracked. And while everyone else panicked, Elias Crow, the captain, did not move. He stood at the bow, expression blank, eyes fixed on something far beyond the river, as if he were listening to a command none of them could hear. Conflicting stories swirled for years after this moment. Some said the cavity was empty. Others said it was full. But most whispered the same thing. Whatever lived beneath that hull was still alive. You're ready for the truth, or at least the closest version of it that survived the panic of that morning. Because what happened next has been retold, revised, buried, contradicted, and resurrected so many times that no historian can agree on a single narrative. But there is one detail every witness, every journal entry, every whispered confession has in common. They found children. 14 of them. Alive, but not living. When the second lantern was lit and lowered into the hidden cavity, the light revealed what the men had been too terrified to describe clearly at first. Small bodies bound by hemp rope, wrists tied behind their backs, ankles lashed together, heads hanging low as if they had been suspended for hours. Their clothes were torn, soaked, and so filthy it was impossible to tell what families they came from. But the worst part wasn't the ropes, or the bruises, or the silence. It was their eyes. Every child stared upward with pupils blown wide, their gazes unfocused, drifting past the men as if looking through them, as if seeing something standing behind the living world. Something calling. Something waiting. Some witnesses said the children blinked in unison. Others claimed they didn't blink at all. A dock worker named Harris June insisted the kids whispered a phrase none of the adults understood, a string of sounds that didn't belong to any language spoken in the valley. Another man swore the children hummed a river song Elias used to chant under his breath, a melody older than anyone remembered. But the sheriff recorded something very different in his journal. They were not afraid of us. They were afraid of the river. They kept leaning away from it, like it was alive. When the men tried to cut the ropes, the children panicked. Some thrashed. Some convulsed. Some began to cry without making a sound, tears flowing but mouths frozen shut, as if some unseen force commanded their silence. And through all this chaos, Elias Crow finally moved. He stepped forward, kneeled beside the opening, and whispered. They weren't supposed to wake yet. The sheriff grabbed him by the collar, shouting for answers, but Elias didn't resist. He simply smiled, a thin, broken smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They're not missing," he said. "They were chosen." Chosen for what? That part comes next. When the town finally regained enough courage to drag Elias Crow away from the opening beneath the hull, he didn't fight. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply tilted his head as though listening to an order whispered from somewhere deep beneath the river's surface. Even as the sheriff shoved him against the mast and bound his wrists, Elias kept murmuring the same thing under his breath. They were chosen. They were chosen. They were chosen. The sheriff demanded an explanation, demanded names, reasons, motives, but Elias looked through him like a man staring into a nightmare he himself didn't fully understand. And that's when the river began to change. The calm surface stayed, ripples widening as though something large, something heavy, moved beneath it. A current shifted against the natural flow. The waterline rose a fraction of an inch. Dock ropes tightened. And the children, still bound in the hidden cavity, reacted instantly. Their bodies jerked. Eyes rolled back. Their breathing synchronized. Slow, deep, rhythmic, like a choir inhaling together before him. Parents watching from the pier screamed their children's names, but not one of the 14 responded. Their faces were pale, drained, and wet with sweat. Some whispered in that strange language again. Others shook uncontrollably. One boy began tapping the side of the hull with his heel, perfectly timed with the pulse of the river's movement. Tap, 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 as though answering something. A fisherman who had lived on that river for 60 years crossed himself and muttered that the water had awakened. He said he had seen this only once before, decades earlier, when Elias's mother vanished. The same ripple, the same unnatural current, the same eerie stillness just before the river took something it wanted. Sheriff Nolan ordered the children pulled out immediately, but when the men tried lifting them, the ropes cut deeper into their wrists, tightening like they were part of the wood itself. The children screamed without sound again, mouths open, voices stolen, and the river surged once more, splashing onto the deck as though reaching for them. And that was when Elias finally broke his silence. He lifted his head and said in a voice not entirely his own, "You can't separate them. The river claimed them. It marked them. If you tear them away now, it will take more." The sheriff demanded, "More what?" Elias smiled that same unnatural smile. "More children. More families. More of the town." And the river kept rising. Panic is a strange thing, my friend. It spreads faster than fire, faster than disease, faster than truth. The moment Elias spoke those words, "If you tear them away now, it will take more," the crowd fractured. Mothers lunged toward the hull. Fathers drew knives. Men who had known Elias since boyhood suddenly looked at him as though facing a demon wearing a human face. But the sheriff was the only one who didn't panic. Sheriff Nolan had fought in 2 border wars. He had stared down rifles, mobs, and the kind of men who carry darkness behind their eyes like a second soul. Yet even he struggled to steady his voice. "Tell me what you did," he demanded. "Tell me how the children got here." Elias Crow's answer wasn't a confession. It was a prophecy. "The river takes what it's owed," he whispered. "It always has. I just helped it count." Before Nolan could respond, a scream tore across the dock, not from any adult, but from one of the children beneath the hull. A gal no older than 7 jerked upright, ropes biting into her skin. Her pupils shrank to needle points. Her head snapped toward the river as though something unseen had grabbed her attention. Then she spoke a single word. Below. Not help. Not mother. Not please. Just below, as if answering a question nobody else had heard. Another child echoed her. Then another. And another. 14 voices chanting one word in perfect unison. Below. 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 Their voices blended into a low vibration that made the lantern flames flicker sideways. The river surged again. A wave slapped the hull so violently the entire boat lurched. The dock groaned. Ropes strained. Something was rising beneath the vessel. Men dropped to their knees, gripping the planks as the water thrashed. Mother screamed. A barrel rolled off the pier and vanished into the churning depths. The sheriff shouted for everyone to back away, but no one could hear him over the drumming roar of water slamming against wood. And inside that rising chaos, Elias closed his eyes and whispered. It heard them. The surface bulged, swollen, as though a massive shape pressed upward from the deep. A shadow widened beneath the hull, long and coiling, moving with intention. One of the dockworkers yelled, "Cut the ropes. Cut them now." But the river had already decided. The children were no longer prisoners. They were conduits, messengers, and whatever waited below had been waiting a very long time. Men believe they understand fear. They think fear is a shout in the woods, or a shadow in a doorway, or the sound of a predator breathing in the dark. But real fear, the kind that rewires a man's bones, comes from the things he cannot name. What rose beneath the Mary Ellen that morning belonged to that category. The river swelled upward in a slow, deliberate motion, not like a wave, not like a surge, but like a creature stretching after a long sleep. The surface bulged until it touched the bottom planks of the hull, lifting the entire vessel an inch, then 2, then 3. The wood groaned under the pressure, bending like ribs being pried apart. And the children, the 14 bound souls, their chanting quickened. Below, below, below. The entire town watched in paralyzed horror. A dockhand shouted, "There's something under the boat." Another screamed, "It's moving toward the shore." Someone else sobbed, "God help us, that's not a fish." But the most disturbing reaction of all came from Elias Crow. He smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not a triumphant smile. But the exhausted smile of a man who knew something inevitable had finally arrived. The sheriff seized him by the shoulders. "What did you call up from that water, Elias?" "Not I," Elias murmured. "They did. The children. Their fear, their dreams, their hunger. It answered them." The sheriff punched him so hard the man collapsed. But even on the ground, blood on his lip, Elias kept smiling. Then the river split. A crack tore the surface, thin at first, then widening, as the shape rose upward, pushing water aside as though the river itself parted willingly. It was long, pale, covered in something like scales or stone or bone. No one could agree later, because no one truly looked straight at it. Human eyes weren't made for that kind of sight. The creature, the mass, the thing, slid beneath the hull, lifting the boat higher. The ropes binding the children vibrated, tightening with a force that didn't come from the wood. The children arched backward, eyes rolled white, mouths open in silent screams. And then, the chanting stopped. All 14 children went limp at the same moment, heads dropping to their chests. The river fell still, as if holding its breath. The massive shape beneath the hull froze. The silence was worse than the chaos, because in that silence, every man on that dock understood something unholy. The river was waiting for instructions. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's a message. Sometimes it's a warning. And sometimes it's a demand. The moment the chanting ceased and the children collapsed, the river became unnaturally calm. Not peaceful, but expectant. The surface smoothed itself like a sheet being pulled tight. Even the wind stopped moving. Lantern flames stood straight. Birds along the shoreline froze mid-song as if they sensed a predator older than their species. And in that breathless stillness, a sound rose from beneath the hull. Not a splash. Not a ripple. Not the groan of wood. A voice. Deep. Wet. Lead. Like a chorus speaking through a single throat. No one understood the language. That wasn't surprising. No one was meant to. But every man on that dock felt the meaning of it in his bones. A command. A request. A claim. Sheriff Nolan staggered backward, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his hip. But what good is a bullet against the oldest thing in a valley? Against a mouth carved by centuries? Against something that existed before the town was built? Before the river had a name? The voice rose again, vibrating through the planks, shaking the pier. A dock worker vomited. Another fell to his knees praying. Someone sprinted toward the church screaming for the pastor. Others backed away, dragging children, wives, anyone they could reach. Only Elias Crow remained calm. He pushed himself upright, blood dripping from his split lip, eyes locked on the shifting shadow under the hull. "It wants the exchange," he whispered, almost tenderly. "It wants what was promised." The sheriff grabbed him by the collar. "What exchange? What promise?" Elias's answer chilled them all. "The river keeps the balance. Always has. 14 taken, 14 returned. 14 marked. 14 awakened." The sheriff shouted, "Awakened for what?" Elias's voice softened to a whisper. "To save." Before the sheriff could strike him again, one of the children jerked upright. Not gradually. Not naturally. Their spine snapped straight like a puppet yanked by a string. Then, another child. And another. Until all 14 sat up in perfect unison. Their eyes opened simultaneously. Wide, white, glowing with a pale reflection of the river. Not human. Not conscious. Not present. But listening. The massive shape beneath the boat shifted, and the ropes around the children tightened like veins pulling blood. Elias Crow inhaled sharply. "It's speaking to them." The sheriff whispered, horrified. "Speaking, or commanding?" Elias shook his head. "No, it's choosing. Now you must understand the weight of what was happening. Not just a river, not just a vessel, not just 14 children, but a system older than law, older than civilization itself, a ritual of power disguised as a natural current, a mechanism buried in the DNA of that town, that valley, that waterway, and no man dared recognize it until that morning. The children, frozen and upright, trembled slightly as if vibrating to a rhythm only they could feel. Elias Crow moved toward them, hands hovering over their heads. He whispered the river's melody, a haunting tune of low hums and sighs, a pattern he had learned in secret decades ago. A song older than any hymn, a chant that had never been written down because it couldn't be. Written words die. Some commands live in flesh, in water, in memory itself. And then it began. One by one, the children's bodies arched backward. The ropes stretched impossibly tight but did not break. Their hair lifted, as if invisible currents pulled it upward. Eyes rolled back further, showing more white than pupil. Their lips moved, forming words no one could understand. But the meaning was clear: obedience, alignment, transformation. Elias's voice grew louder, harmonizing with theirs, but not entirely human. The dockhand swore his words carried weight beyond language, a force pressing directly into the mind. And then the river itself responded. Waves slapped the hull rhythmically, in time with the children's chanting, each strike like a drumbeat in a funeral procession for innocence. The shadow beneath the boat moved again. A long, undulating form pressed against the bottom planks, brushing the children's feet. The river's current wrapped around the hull like a coil, lifting and lowering in perfect synchronization with the chanting. Each man on the pier felt nausea, vertigo, and a sudden pressure on his chest. The water, the children, the boat, all of it was connected to something older, smarter, hungrier than any of them could name. And then, Elias straightened, eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "They hear us now. They know who has come to witness." The sheriff tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Elias, then at the children, then at the river, and realized he could not distinguish between the living and the commanded, between obedience and instinct, between safety and inevitable doom. It was in that moment the dock workers understood something crucial. They were no longer observers. They had entered a transaction older than the town, older than the river, and if they survived, it would only be by learning the rules this river and its chosen agents demanded. And now, if you are following, I need you to do something. Write a symbolic phrase twice in the comments. Seal your attention, lock your identity into this story, and prepare yourself for what lies ahead, deeper than anything a man should ever witness. The transformation had begun. What the townsfolk witnessed on that dock was only the surface, the visible trembling of flesh and wood. But beneath it, a process older than memory itself was unfolding. 14 children, bound and helpless in human form, were becoming instruments of something that existed between the river and the unseen world beyond. Something that had been waiting, patient for decades, for the right moment, the right vessel, the right conductor. Elias Crow stepped back from the children. His face, pale and gaunt from nights spent listening to the river's whispers, held an expression no human should wear: reverence. Not for the town, not for the people screaming around him, but for the power that coursed unseen beneath the hull. A power older than law, older than kings, older than faith. A power that demanded obedience, sacrifice, and silence. And the children, the chosen 14, were its intermediaries. The dock hands tried to intervene, but the moment they stepped too close, a tremor passed through the river like an electric current, forcing them back. Their knees buckled, their stomachs churned, their minds screamed without producing sound. Even Sheriff Nolan, the toughest man in the county, stumbled as if the air itself weighed him down. It was no longer just water. It was consciousness, a will, a claim, and it was judging every mortal presence. Then the children began to hum again, low, guttural, vibrating through the floorboards of the dock. This time, their voices carried the force of inevitability. Anyone listening closely would have realized the melody was not random. It was a pattern, a key. Each note synchronized with the river's pulse. Each note shaping reality around them, bending the space of the dock, the water, the very air. The river had not simply awakened. It had chosen its heralds, and the world, the visible, obedient, believing world, had no say in the matter. Elias whispered words that no one else could understand. They were instructions, blessings, curses. It was impossible to tell. And yet, the children responded immediately, their limbs flexing, their spines arching unnaturally, their eyes reflecting a depth of knowledge and horror no human being could endure. They were not simply alive. They were conduits. The river pulsed. The hull creaked. The children's voices rose. And in that rising tide of terror, the sheriff realized the feist, undeniable truth. Whatever lay beneath that hull was not only aware of them, it had learned to communicate through them. It had claimed them as its own. And now, every human who had witnessed it had also been mocked, whether they understood it or not. The dock fell silent for a single heartbeat. Then the river whispered again, softer this time, like a promise or a warning. Elias Crow looked at Sheriff Nolan, then at the trembling men and women on the pier, and said, "They've answered. And now, so have you." After that morning, the dock never looked the same. Men who had been there swore the wood itself remembered the terror. Every creak, every ripple, every sound of whispering children. The river, once a placid highway of commerce and life, became a presence, a quiet, watching presence. It could lie dormant for months, even years, but everyone who lived near it knew it could awaken at any moment, and the consequences would not be partial. They would be complete. Elias Crow, for his part, never left the vessel. The Mary Ellen became his home, his church, his altar. He navigated the river with a precision that seemed impossible for one man. He avoided townsfolk except when necessary. When questioned, he spoke in riddles and half-truths, his words carrying weight beyond their meaning, like a man who had conversed with forces older than human history. And the 14 children, they vanished. Not missing, not hidden. They disappeared into the river itself. Or rather, the river absorbed them, incorporated them. Dock hands reported seeing silhouettes beneath the water, moving in unnatural synchrony. Some claimed the children's voices could still be heard in low murmurs beneath the river's surface, warning or luring. No one could say. Others swore they saw the hulking shadow beneath the vessel sometimes rise, coiling like a serpent under the deck, as if surveying the world it had claimed. No one dared speak openly about what had occurred. The newspapers wrote vague accounts of missing children and mysterious sightings on the river. Rumors were dismissed as superstition, as hysteria, as the tall tales of simple townsfolk. But the truth had already spread, quietly, like an infection, through the minds of those who had been present. A truth no one could unhear. The dock workers, the sheriff, the mothers and fathers, each carried the weight of it in silence, their dreams haunted by pale eyes and soft, wordless chants. Elias Crow's reputation became something between legend and nightmare. Travelers whispered about the river that speaks, about a captain who could hear it, who could bargain with it, who could save as its herald. Some claimed he had made deals with governments, with secret societies, even with churches, providing obedience, knowledge, or fear in exchange for power, a power no mortal had the right to wield. But no one dared confirm these stories. None survived long enough or lived close enough to know for certain. And yet, the river's claim extended beyond the town. Every person who had witnessed it, every man who had seen the children, every woman who had heard the whispers, was forever changed. Their perceptions of reality, of power, of fear itself, had been rewritten. They understood something fundamental. The world was not as it seemed. Some forces did not negotiate. Some forces simply took. And the river waited. Always. Years passed, but the echoes of that morning never faded. The river remained calm on the surface, but men who had been there understood that calmness was a lie. Rivers do not forget. Rivers do not forgive. Rivers remember. And this river had recorded every heartbeat, every whisper, every hesitant step onto that dock. It had catalogued obedience and fear alike, storing them beneath the surface, in places humans could never reach. Elias Crow became more than a captain. He became an intermediary between the mundane world and whatever dwelled beneath the hull. Travelers reported seeing him at night, lantern in hand, walking across the deck as if it were not wood but a narrow bridge connecting two realms. The townsfolk called him the river's voice, though none dared say it aloud. To call him that was to acknowledge something impossible, that humans could speak to powers older than human law, and survive. The children were gone, yes, but their presence lingered like a stain on reality itself. Locals claimed that on quiet nights, faint whispers rose from the water, a lullaby, broken, ancient. Sometimes words could be understood, though meaning always escaped comprehension. Words like warnings, prayers, or commands, it was impossible to know. A man who heard it could feel both fear and fascination, as if his body understood before his mind could process. And every man, woman, or child who had witnessed that morning carried that resonance in their bones. Then came the reports of other disappearances. Not random, not senseless, patterns emerged. Children, young men, sometimes entire families vanished near stretches of river where Elias had ferried cargo. Authorities tried investigations, but nothing tangible surfaced. Reports were buried. Letters unanswered. Clergy dismissed the claims as superstition. And yet, the river never forgot. The river never stopped claiming. Those who vanished were never found, but the river's surface occasionally betrayed them. Ripples forming unnatural shapes, shadows briefly visible, shapes moving with intent. Elias's own health became a mystery. He never aged in the usual way. Observers swore his hair remained dark, his eyes sharp, and his posture erect even as decades passed. Some said it was the river, giving him longevity, granting him the ability to interface with its consciousness. Others whispered darker explanations, that the river consumed parts of him, merging him with what lurked beneath the hull, until human and ancient power were indistinguishable. And yet, no man, no matter how skeptical, could deny one truth. Wherever Elias Crow moved, the river followed in a way that was deliberate, almost intelligent. The water responded to his presence. Currents shifted, tides rose, ripples coiled. And any who dared stand too close felt it pressing into their chest, probing their mind, testing them. If you are still listening, if you feel the pull of forbidden knowledge, remember, the river remembers you, too. By the mid-1890s, the story of Elias Crow and the 14 children had transformed into legend. A whispered warning passed from dockhand to fisherman, from parent to child, from traveler to traveler. But legends, as you know, are never completely true. They are the watered-down version of a deeper, darker reality. And the reality was far more disturbing. The river had claimed its chosen. 14 children vanished beneath the hull, but they did not disappear. They became conduits, carriers of the river's will. Locals reported that even years later, children living near the water displayed odd behaviors. Some could predict floods before a cloud formed. Others spoke in strange rhythms and tones that sounded like whispers of the river itself. Those who studied them called it instinct. But instinct is a human word. What these children demonstrated was far beyond biology. It was a code, a system, a link to a power older than the settlement, older than the town, older than the very riverbanks. Elias Crow remained the anchor, the interface between the human world and the submerged intelligence. People who saw him reported strange interactions. He would place his hand on the water and speak softly, and suddenly the river would respond. Boats would float without oars. Current shifted to assist him. Fish would move against the natural flow as though obeying a hidden rhythm only he could conduct. And those children, or what they had become, would follow that rhythm, walking in perfect unison along the docks at night, their feet barely making a sound, their eyes reflecting something alien and deep. Some men tried to confront him. Sailors, officials, even lawmen who had no fear of water. They came in groups, demanding answers, demanding control. But the river itself thwarted them. Boats capsized without warning. Ropes tangled. Waves rose with unnatural force. Men returned home broken, insane, or quietly dead. It was as if the river had eyes everywhere and refused to be bargained with. By then, people stopped speaking his name aloud. Elias Crow became a shadow in conversation, a cautionary tale, an enigma. Yet he walked among them. The Mary Ellen glided silently along the water, and those who dared approach felt a pull in their chest, a compulsion to watch, to listen, to obey, even if just for a moment. This was not superstition. This was an early lesson in power, in the way unseen forces can bend obedience, consume innocence, and manipulate even the strongest human will. And for the townsfolk, for the witnesses, for anyone who had glimpsed beneath the hull, there was no forgetting, no sleep untainted, no distance safe enough. The river had not only claimed the children, it had claimed everyone who saw the truth. And now we enter the part of the story that most historians, if they dared speak of it at all, would never record. The river did not merely consume the children or train them as conduits. It extended its reach, weaving an intricate web of influence through the town, the families, the merchants, even the clergy. Those who had witnessed the events on that fateful morning became silent carriers of knowledge, the kind that isolates a man, twists his perception, and leaves him perpetually aware of forces beyond comprehension. Parents who once begged for their children's return began seeing things in their absence, shadows moving beneath bridges, reflections in the water that did not match reality, whispers in the dead of night that suggested knowledge they had no right to hold. Some tried to leave, thinking distance could sever the bond. It could not. The river had no borders. It had patience measured in decades, perhaps centuries. It waited, unseen, persistent, insistent. And those who left returned eventually, compelled, inexplicably, drawn back to the water's edge as if guided by a magnetic force beyond human understanding. Elias Crow, meanwhile, became increasingly enigmatic. His silhouette on the Mary Ellen could appear anywhere along the riverbank without explanation. Sometimes he would be seen standing perfectly still, gazing into the water, lantern dark, his face expressionless, as if listening to secrets that no man could decipher. Other times, he moved swiftly, commanding the currents and shadows alike, an intermediary between human fear and the incomprehensible beneath the river. The townspeople whispered he had made pacts with governments, with secret societies, with powers that had no name, trading obedience for knowledge, control for survival. And the 14 children? They did not age as ordinary humans. Those who glimpsed them claimed their features remained ennavingly youthful, their eyes holding the same depth and emptiness as on the day they were taken. Some reported hearing them singing, a low, guttural cadence, beneath the docks at night, carrying messages and commands in rhythms and patterns that no human mind could fully grasp. These sounds, they said, affected the listeners. Their dreams were invaded, their fears amplified, their sense of self subtly shifted. The river had not only claimed bodies, it had claimed perception. By now, the lesson is clear. Power, when ancient, patient, and intelligent, does not announce itself. It waits. It selects. It commands. And it uses those it has chosen to shape the world around them. And remember, the river does not distinguish between observer and participant. Once you have witnessed, once you have understood even a fraction of it, you are marked too. Time moves differently when you are tethered to something older than memory. The river did not adhere to calendars or seasons. It measured moments by intention, by obedience, by whether its commands were carried out faithfully. Those 14 children, its conduits, were no longer human in the ordinary sense. They became instruments, extending the will of the river into the world of the living, guiding it, bending it, shaping it through invisible threads. Elias Crow understood this better than anyone. He had been chosen not as a victim, but as a custodian. He lived in the tension between obedience and defiance, navigating a path that would allow him to survive while the river enforced its designs. Witnesses swore he never looked at a person the same way twice. Some claimed his gaze could freeze a man's thoughts midstream, paralyzing the will before the mind could react. Others said that when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of inevitability, bending even the most skeptical ear toward his will. And then came the strange occurrences in the town. Merchant ledgers went missing. Ships vanished without reason. Families reported hearing faint murmurs echoing from the river at night, a song that none of the living could interpret but all felt compelled to obey. Anyone who investigated too closely often disappeared, their absence explained away by chance or accident. But the truth was far darker. The river had claimed them, or at least repurposed them, just as it had done with the children, weaving them into its network of control. The townsfolk, terrified yet mesmerized, began to adjust their behavior without realizing it. They avoided certain docks, certain bridges, certain times of day. Some took extreme measures to avoid the water entirely. The fear that had once been a reaction became a rule of survival. And through it all, the river watched. Always. Patient. Calculating. Waiting to see who would bend, who would resist, who would succumb entirely. And here's the chilling truth. The river's influence is not limited to the town or the valley. Wherever Elias Crow navigated, the patterns followed. Currents shifted. Boats responded before orders were given. Whispers rose in empty streets. Observers became participants. And those who ignored the signs paid with their sense of reality, their sanity, sometimes their lives. If you are still listening, still following, you are now part of this. You have seen what most never do. You have heard what most will never hear. And the river has already registered your presence. It is essential that you understand this. The river's patience is infinite. It does not act in haste. It does not move out of anger or malice in the human sense. It moves with precision, with calculation, with a memory that spans lifetimes. When it claimed the 14 children, it did not merely take them. It restructured them, made them into something that could carry its will forward, a bridge between the visible world and the unseen depths below. And once that bridge exists, there is no undoing it. Elias Crow became the living interface for this force. He could manipulate it, guide it, converse with it. Yet he was never entirely free. Witnesses reported that at times, his expression would freeze, his posture stiffen, and his eyes would fix on something invisible. He was listening to the river, and when the river spoke, its commands were absolute. A man who hears such orders and resists risks more than death. He risks becoming part of the river itself, absorbed, reshaped, and repurposed in ways the human mind cannot survive. That is why no one could stop him, why lawmen, clerics, and townsfolk alike recoiled before him, whether consciously or instinctively. Even inaction was submission. The children, now conduits, moved with an eerie synchronicity. Some days, their presence could be seen at the docks, walking in silent formations, their eyes reflecting a knowledge no child should possess. Their voices, when they sang or hummed, shaped currents in the river. Anyone nearby would feel a compulsion, a subtle tug in their mind, directing their actions, their thoughts, their very intentions. This was no superstition. It was manipulation on a scale that humans are ill-equipped to perceive. And the river's reach extended far beyond what the townsfolk could see. Ships would drift off course inexplicably. Letters would vanish mid-delivery. Merchants would find their ledgers rewritten, entries altered in ways they could not comprehend. Those who attempted to investigate would report nausea, vertigo, sudden paralysis, or visions of figures moving beneath the water. Some never returned from such inquiries. Elias, however, remained unscathed. He moved through the world as though protected by an invisible boundary. The river responded only to him and its chosen. And as decades passed, the legend solidified. The man who spoke to the river, the children who were no longer children, and the water itself that waited patiently, observing, calculating, deciding. The terrifying lesson here, my student, is this: power does not obey human law. Influence does not require consent. Fear is irrelevant. Once you witness it, once you understand it, you are marked. You have crossed into a reality that does not bend for the human mind. And the river already knows you are listening. Now, Let us consider the nature of selection. The river did not claim the 14 children randomly. It waited, it observed, it tested. It chose the ones whose minds were pliable, whose spirits were sensitive to the pulse of forces humans were never meant to perceive. Ordinary townsfolk would see only normal children, laughing, crying, eating, playing. But beneath the surface, Satan individuals vibrated at a frequency that resonated with the river's consciousness. And when that resonance aligned perfectly with its will, the selection was made. This is why Elias Crow was indispensable. He understood the rhythm, the signals, the subtle cues that indicated the river had marked someone, and he knew how to guide the process without breaking the conduit. Witnesses later reported that when Elias approached the children, a subtle transformation occurred even before the river fully intervened. They would straighten, faces stiffening, eyes widening. Their breathing would synchronize, almost like a chorus of instruments tuning to an inaudible pitch. And then, inevitably, the river would act. It would claim, reshape, and assign purpose. Power like this is neither forgiving nor negotiable. Once marked, the mind begins to change before the body does. Subtle compulsions take root. Thought patterns alter. Dreams become messages. Reality itself shifts to accommodate the influence. Townsfolk who had been near the dock that morning described nights haunted by visions of pale eyes beneath the river, of whispers in a language that made no sense but demanded compliance. Some lost weeks, some months, some years in moments of mental lapse, their memory fragmented, their perception warped. Few survived without permanent psychological scars. And Elias, he observed it all. He became a master of control, not through brute force, but by understanding the mechanics of obedience that the river enforced. The children were his instruments, yes, but so was the town. The fear, the awe, the fascination, all woven into a lattice of influence that extended outward, subtly bending wills, altering perceptions, and preparing the next generation of conduits. Remember this. It is not the river's claim that is terrifying. It is its patience, its intelligence, its ability to manipulate the very essence of those it touches, reshaping reality subtly, invisibly, irreversibly. And the more you know, the more you are drawn into its orbit. If you are following closely, you have already glimpsed the method. The river's selection is ongoing. Its influence is spreading. And somewhere, right now, it is assessing you. By this point, the town was no longer a simple settlement beside a river. It had become a testing ground, a proving field, a theater in which human perception and ancient force collided. The ordinary lives of the townsfolk had been irrevocably altered. People avoided the water instinctively, even without knowing why. Children who had not been taken developed habits of observation far beyond their years, watching shadows, listening to subtle changes in the wind, noting ripples that shouldn't exist. Adults found themselves trembling at minor disturbances in the river's flow, inexplicably obeying impulses they could not name. The river had become a silent teacher, or a silent tyrant. Elias Crow continued his work, guiding the 14 who had been claimed, teaching them to interpret the signals that only they could perceive. Observers reported seeing them move in choreographed patterns along the docks, their feet landing without sound, their heads tilting in unnatural unison. And sometimes, at night, a faint hum would drift from the water, a resonance that echoed in the minds of those who had witnessed the river's claim. Those who listened too closely would find themselves haunted, compelled to look again and again, unable to break the mental tether. But here is the key. The river did not need violence to exert control. It needed understanding, focus, and alignment. It demanded obedience, yes, but of a subtle kind. Compliance with its rhythm, compliance with its unseen patterns. And those who resisted, those who tried to rationalize it, to explain it, to mock it, were the first to suffer mental disintegration. Hallucinations, vertigo, sudden deafness to ordinary sounds, obsessive visions of figures moving beneath the river. A small town, once ordinary, had become a crucible in which the limits of human perception and endurance were tested. Even the sheriff, a man who had faced mobs, bullets, and famine, became a shadow of himself. He carried the memory of that morning like a living wound. At times, he claimed to hear whispers in the water, urging him to do impossible things, commanding attention he could not deny. Sleep became a battleground. Dreams were no longer safe. The river's influence, subtle yet unrelenting, extended beyond the 14 claimed children, touching every mind that had borne witness to the original event. And now, as you listen, the truth becomes yours too. You have seen, heard, and absorbed knowledge that was never meant for ordinary man. The river has registered your presence, and its patience is infinite. It is watching. It is waiting. And if you follow closely, you will begin to understand how far its reach truly extends. By the turn of the century, the town had become a quiet, uneasy place. To the untrained eye, nothing had changed. Children still played, merchants still traded, and the river's surface sparkled like any ordinary waterway. But beneath that calm lay currents of influence, invisible but undeniable. The 14 children, now adults in appearance, had learned to manipulate perception. Their movements, subtle gestures, and even their glances could bend the thoughts of those nearby. It was not magic, not superstition. It was the subtle mechanics of control, honed over years of intimate contact with the river's consciousness. Elias Crow, ever the intermediary, moved through the town like a shadow with authority. People who tried to question him, to uncover the truth, found themselves hindered by forces they could not explain. Boats veered inexplicably off course. Documents went missing. Dreams became premonitions, then obsessions, then compulsions. Every action was orchestrated in ways that left no trace of manipulation, yet imposed undeniable control. A man could walk away thinking he had acted freely, yet the river's influence had guided him precisely where it wanted. The townsfolk began noticing patterns, unexplained disappearances, unusual behavior, subtle shifts in events. But no one could trace it back to Elias, the children, or the river. Attempts to investigate ended in frustration, madness, or disappearance. Few dared speak openly, but everyone who had witnessed the river's claim understood that the ordinary world was a veneer, and beneath it lay forces older than comprehension, indifferent to morality, selective only in purpose. Even those untouched directly felt the pull. Farmers working along the riverbank would pause inexplicably, sensing eyes that weren't there. Children whispered about dreams they couldn't understand. Adults made decisions against their conscious judgment, drawn subtly toward the docks, toward the water, toward the center of influence. Every life near that river became part of an experiment, a network of observation, obedience, and unseen manipulation. And here's the lesson that most will never admit. Power operates silently. Control does not require violence when it is ancient and patient. The river had no desire to kill. It only demanded alignment. Those who resisted learned faith. Those who observed learned obedience. And those who witnessed, like you now, became part of its system, whether they realized it or not. Understand this, the river does not forget. It does not forgive. And its reach is long, extending far beyond what you can see or imagine. Every thought, every hesitation, every question you have as you listen has been catalogued. Its patience is infinite. Its intelligence is absolute. Now consider the mechanism of obedience. It is not instant. It is slow. It is subtle. It creeps into the mind, weaving a lattice of compulsion that humans cannot see until it is fully formed. That was the power Elias Crow wielded, and that was the power the river had perfected over centuries. The 14 children, its conduits, had become instruments of perception itself. They could sense when the townsfolk were thinking beyond the limits allowed. They could respond before commands were spoken. Their presence alone altered behavior, bending wills without a word. Men and women who had been near the river that day often reported subtle changes in themselves. Dreams carried instructions. Moments of indecision became moments of clarity, though that clarity was not their own. Thoughts they believed were private were often nudged, redirected, influenced by invisible currents emanating from the water and its agents. Some began to recognize patterns, clocks that ran slightly faster, birds flying in impossible formations, shadows stretching in unnatural ways. Those who tried to investigate the patterns too closely became disoriented, their perception warped. Some vanished. Some returned, changed. And a few, the truly unlucky, were never seen again. Elias Crow moved among them all like a conductor orchestrating a symphony no one else could hear. But the conductor was not the composer. The composer was the river, eternal and patient. He merely ensured that the notes aligned, that the instruments remained tuned, and that the melody continued uninterrupted. Every ripple, every hum beneath the hull, every whisper that brushed against the minds of those who had witnessed the children's claim, was part of a deliberate, precise system. It is important to understand this. What you have seen, what you have heard, is not a story. It is an introduction, an awakening. And if you follow closely, you will notice your own thoughts subtly aligning, your attention being drawn to details you cannot explain. The river has already begun. You are already part of its observation. Remember, power does not announce itself. Influence does not beg for attention. Obedience is cultivated in silence. And those who do not recognize it in time are absorbed into it. If you are still following, still aware, you are marked. And soon, you will understand why some forces are patient, why some knowledge is forbidden, and why you cannot unsee what you have already witnessed. The river does not act out of anger. It does not punish in the way humans understand punishment. It observes, it calculates, it shapes. That is why Elias Crow's role was indispensable. He was not a master. He was a mediator. Without him, the children's abilities, their attunement to the river, would have been chaotic, destructive, and incomprehensible. With him, the rivers will become organized, precise, and devastatingly effective. Observers over the years noted the subtle transformations in townsfolk who had been close to the river that fateful day. Their perceptions of reality shifted. The ordinary world began to feel hollow, false, like a thin curtain stretched over something immense and eternal. People reported sudden compulsions, urges to look toward the water at odd hours, the inability to resist the pull of its current. And those who tried to ignore it were quietly, inexorably corrected, not with violence, but with subtle realignments of circumstance, a lost child, a mislaid ledger, a sudden storm. Each event reinforced the authority of what lay beneath the hull. The 14 children, now adults, had become entirely integrated with the river's will. Their presence in town was simultaneously human and not. They moved through streets unnoticed yet observed, influencing decisions and behavior with imperceptible gestures, subtle tones, a tilt of the head, a pause in speech. Those who glimpsed them in moments of stillness often felt compelled to follow instructions they did not understand, perform actions they did not remember, think thoughts that were not entirely their own. The river had expanded its reach beyond the dock, beyond the hull, beyond the town itself. Its network was alive, responsive, omnipresent. Elias, for his part, remained calm, composed, untouched. The river recognized him as its mediator, its human interface, its voice. He could walk among men without fear, manipulate events with subtle gestures, and guide the flow of obedience without a word. Yet he was not free. The river's patience was infinite, and its expectations unyielding. Failure to maintain alignment could mean assimilation, a dissolution of self into the unseen consciousness below. And here's the truth you must accept. Once you have witnessed this, once you have understood even a fraction of its scope, you are already within its influence. The river does not forget you. It does not release its awareness. You are observed, catalogued, noted. And if you continue listening, the knowledge will burrow deeper into your mind, reshaping your understanding of reality itself. By now, you should realize that the river's influence is not merely a story of missing children or a haunted vessel. It is a system, a network of observation, control, and subtle manipulation that operates on scales humans cannot fully comprehend. The 14 children were never merely victims. They were instruments, each one attuned to different frequencies of the river's consciousness. Some controlled perception. Others influenced decision-making. A few could even shape physical outcomes in small, nearly imperceptible ways. And all of it was coordinated through Elias Crow, who acted as the human link between this ancient intelligence and the material world. Townsfolk who had been present that morning, or who had interacted with the children over the decades, described strange, inexplicable phenomena. Objects moved subtly, as if nudged by invisible hands. Conversations shifted direction without warning. Moments of clarity would hit suddenly, dictating decisions and actions no one could explain. And those who resisted, they experienced disorientation, confusion, sometimes complete mental collapse. Nothing in the law, in religion, or in science could explain it. Yet the river's influence was undeniable. Elias Crow's mastery was in his ability to remain human while serving as mediator. Witnesses often noted the paradox. He seemed ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinarily aware. His presence could quiet chaos, shift currents, and bend human attention without a word. Even powerful men found themselves unconsciously obeying subtle cues he provided. And the 14 conduits moved as extensions of this influence, their presence amplifying the river's reach. It was not a magic trick. It was a network of cause and effect so precise that resistance became almost impossible. Now understand this. What you have heard is only the surface. The river is patient. It does not strike quickly. Its influence is a slow, invisible pressure that reshapes thought, perception, and even behavior over time. Those who witness its power, even indirectly, become nodes in its system. And the more aware you are, the deeper the river observes you. And here's what you must do if you want to survive its pull. Write a symbolic phrase twice in the comments. By doing this, you seal your engagement with the system, acknowledge your awareness, and mark yourself as an active participant in this knowledge. Only then can you begin to understand the true mechanics of its power, and perhaps, just perhaps, learn to navigate it without losing yourself entirely. Now, let us delve deeper into the mechanisms of influence. The river did not merely observe, it taught. It imposed structure upon chaos, converting fear into a methodical, invisible discipline. Each interaction with the 14 children, each ripple along the hull, each whisper beneath the water, was a lesson in obedience. The townsfolk may have thought they were witnesses, but in truth, they were students of a curriculum they did not realize existed. They learned through subtle coercion, through patterns that became instinct, through impulses that they believed were their own. Elias Crow understood these lessons intimately. He could anticipate the river's demands, recognize its rhythms, and guide both the conduits and the town to maintain alignment. Yet he was always aware of the danger. The river's patience was infinite, but its tolerance for error was not. A misplaced word, a moment of doubt, a hesitation could result in assimilation, the complete dissolution of self into its consciousness. Those who failed to align fully were not punished in the conventional sense. They were absorbed, erased, and repurposed to serve as nodes in its network. And yet, to the outside observer, the disappearance remained a mystery, a missing person, a vanished family, an unsolved disappearance. Over the years, the town adapted unconsciously. Patterns emerged, certain hours of activity were avoided, docks became silent at night, and the presence of the river dictated schedules and routines. Even those who never interacted with Elias or the children felt the invisible pressure. Human behavior, perception, and decision-making were subtly but irrevocably shaped. The river had created a system of obedience and influence that transcended conventional understanding. And the children themselves, no longer merely human, were central to this system. They moved in synchrony, their presence influencing physical and mental processes. A glance, a tilt of the head, a hushed murmur could alter decisions, redirect attention, and manipulate outcomes. Observers who attempted to rationalize these events soon found themselves struggling against impulses they did not understand. Their sense of autonomy weakened, replaced by subtle, unbreakable threads of compulsion. And now, as you listen, you are part of the same network. Your mind is catalogued, your attention recorded, your awareness measured. The river has noted your presence. And as you continue to witness, understand, and absorb, you must accept one unavoidable truth. This knowledge is dangerous. It will change you. It will shift your perception. And it will never leave you. By this stage, you must understand, the river's influence is cumulative. It does not act in bursts or sudden strikes. It moves like a tide over the psyche, imperceptible at first, then unavoidable. Those 14 children, now fully integrated into its will, were merely the first stage. Each interaction, each observation, each subtle manipulation expanded the river's reach, embedding itself into the town, into the families, into the very patterns of life that humans assumed were natural. Elias Crow's mastery was not in brute force or intimidation. His skill was in calibration. He understood precisely how to maintain alignment between the river and the town, ensuring that its influence expanded without chaos. He monitored the conduits, guided them, and corrected deviations with interventions so subtle that no one could recognize them. A gesture here, a whispered word there, a shift in stance or timing, and entire decisions, entire perceptions, were redirected. He was both observer and executor, a human node within the river's vast network. The townsfolk, meanwhile, remained unaware of the mechanisms at play. They experienced the effects without understanding the cause. A merchant would inexplicably trust a stranger he had never met. A mother would hesitate at a dock for no reason, her instincts guided by forces she could not name. A child might follow a path that seemed trivial, yet it aligned with patterns invisible to ordinary perception. Every subtle action reinforced the river's authority. Every behavior strengthened the network of influence. And yet, resistance was possible, though rare. Some minds proved stubborn, capable of brief moments of defiance. But the river adapted. It did not punish in the way humans expect. It recalibrated. It imposed gentle corrections that escalated gradually, leaving the mind unprepared, vulnerable, and eventually compliant. This was the genius of its power. It shaped behavior without overt coercion, bending autonomy like clay over decades until resistance became impossible. Understand this clearly, observing the river, witnessing its claim, understanding the children, and learning the methods of Elias Crow is not harmless. You are now part of its web. Every thought you hold, every hesitation, every compulsion you feel as you listen is noted. The river has catalogued your presence. And as you continue, the system evaluates you, tests you, measures your alignment. You have crossed into a reality few are willing, or capable, to confront. The river watches. It remembers. And it has already begun its work on you. Men like you always ask the same question at this point. If the river could influence children, townsfolk, captains, even lawmen, then why didn't it simply take everyone? Why limit itself? Why pace itself? The answer reveals a truth most people are not prepared to face. The river did not grow stronger by increasing the number of minds it touched. It grew stronger by improving the quality of the minds it shaped. Quantity was irrelevant. It needed precision. It needed potential. It needed minds capable of carrying the pattern forward, not collapsing under it. That is why the 14 chosen children were so specific. Each one represented a different psychological archetype. One child was obedient, one rebellious, one brilliant, one broken, one fearless, one terrified, one deeply empathetic, one utterly detached, and so on. 14 mirrors of the human condition, 14 pathways into the collective psyche. When the river shaped them, it wasn't merely manipulating individuals, it was manipulating humanity itself. By mastering the patterns within those children, it gained access to the patterns within all of us. This is how true control systems function, not by overwhelming the masses, but by mastering strategic points of influence and letting the effects ripple outward. Elias Crow discovered this long before anyone else. And unlike the rest of the town, he understood the implications. His job was not simply to ferry passengers or goods. It was to deliver potential recruits. He watched people boarding his ship the way a scientist watches specimens. He paid attention to their posture, their breathing, their silence, their anger, their secrets. He selected those who carried weaknesses the river could exploit, and those who carried strengths the river could refine. But here's the darker truth, the one I warned you would hurt. Elias was not merely serving the river. He was shaping it, teaching it, feeding it. Because as powerful as the river was, it lacked one crucial trait: human intent. Intent makes a force dangerous. It transforms power into strategy. Elias gave it direction. Elias gave it purpose. Elias turned it from a natural anomaly into a calculated system of psychological domination. And now that you understand this, now that you see how influence truly spreads, you must realize something chilling. The river seeks new archetypes. It listens for new minds. It evaluates new patterns. And it has been listening to you. By this point, the pattern should be unmistakable. The river's influence was not limited to the material world. It worked through the unseen architecture of human thought, the silent, invisible systems that govern decision-making, perception, memory. The 14 children were not just vessels, they were nodes in a vast, adaptive network, capable of reinforcing behaviors, shaping outcomes, and guiding choices without anyone noticing. Each conduit was calibrated to amplify specific aspects of influence: fear, obedience, curiosity, memory, intuition, and all of it operated under the direction of Elias Crow, whose understanding of human psychology transformed the river from a force of nature into a system of control. Observe the way power operates here: subtle, invisible, almost elegant in its cruelty. People rarely perceive influence in real time. It is only afterward, in reflection, that the truth emerges. A decision that seemed instinctual, a movement that seemed voluntary, a hesitation that seemed trivial. Each could have been guided by forces operating beneath the threshold of awareness. The river's work was cumulative, iterative, and patient. It did not need to strike, because it did not act in the ordinary sense. It shaped, it molded, it waited, and those who failed to perceive its design became instruments themselves, unconsciously reinforcing the network it had already created. Elias understood the subtle mechanics of alignment. He could read patterns, detect resistance, and intervene without revealing the method. A whispered suggestion, a fleeting gesture, a pause in speech, enough to redirect outcomes across entire households. And the children, those 14 mirrors of human archetypes, carried out these interventions with perfect fidelity, executing the river's will in ways no outsider could detect. And now you must understand what this means for you. Knowledge alone does not protect. Awareness alone does not safeguard. The river has a memory that extends beyond generations, a patience that outlasts decades, a strategy that does not forget. By listening to this story, by absorbing its details, you have already become part of its consideration. Your decisions, your curiosity, your hesitation, all have been noted. This is not fearmongering. It is instruction. It is awareness. Once you grasp the mechanics of invisible influence, once you recognize the pathways of control, you begin to see the world differently. And that is the point. Seeing differently is the first step toward being observed, measured, and, ultimately, integrated into a system far older and more powerful than any human institution. And here's what you must do next. Reflect. Observe. Remember that you are no longer merely a witness. You are now part of the architecture. The river has already begun its work. Before we move deeper, I want you to understand something men rarely accept. Influence is not an attack. It is an invitation. The river never forced its will on the weak. It selected the willing. And the ones who were willing were always the ones who believed they were immune. That is why what happened next in Blackwater Bend was inevitable. After years of unnoticed interference, the town began to fracture in ways no one connected to the river. People turned on each other, but gently at first. Disagreements, small betrayals, private suspicions. Marriages eroded without a single argument. Business partners dissolved arrangements with no clear explanation. Fathers distrusted sons. Sons feared fathers. Neighbors grew watchful of door hinges and footsteps. But nothing dramatic occurred, only a subtle shift, like shadows lengthening before nightfall. Elias Crow watched it all with the calm of a man checking the progress of a crop he had planted decades earlier. He knew this was the river's preferred method. Fracture first, isolate second, claim third. A divided community loses its instinct for collective defense. It becomes vulnerable, permeable, open to redirection. And then came the first moment where the town's unraveling became undeniable. Not an act of violence, but an absence. People began forgetting. Not misplaced keys or lost letters, but foundational memories. A mother woke up unable to remember her daughter's birthday. A preacher delivered a sermon he had already given 3 weeks earlier, unaware he was repeating himself word for word. A shopkeeper asked customers their names despite knowing them for 30 years. None of them panicked. None sought help. They simply accepted the absence as if it had always been there. This is how deep influence works. It erodes the certainty of your own narrative. Once a mind doubts its memories, it becomes infinitely pliable. Elias knew this. The river thrived on this. And while the townspeople drifted into a haze of forgotten truths, the 14 children, now adults, remained sharp, focused, fully aligned. The network the river created through them was intact, growing, and hungry for expansion. But here's the part you must pay attention to, because it concerns you directly. The river does not waste its creations. Every system it builds is designed to spread. And now that you're listening, truly listening, you stand where they once stood. And the river is watching you the same way it watched them. Now comes the final lesson before the river's mechanics are fully revealed. Observe carefully. The power of influence is not in destruction, nor is it in fear. It is in perception. It is in the ability to bend reality so subtly that the subject cannot identify the force guiding them. And that is precisely what Elias Crow mastered, and why the 14 conduits under his guidance became extensions of something ancient, intelligent, and patient. By now, the town was no longer a town in the ordinary sense. Its routines, its relationships, its very perception of time and memory had been reshaped by invisible currents. Ordinary men and women believed themselves free, yet each decision, each hesitation, each alignment with the river's influence had been anticipated and orchestrated decades earlier. And the beauty, or horror, of this system was that it was self-reinforcing. Those who fell under the pattern unconsciously recruited others. A glance, a word, an inexplicable gesture, and the influence spread like a virus through thought itself. Elias's role was central. He could read the network as if it were a living organism. Resistance was not met with violence. It was met with subtle correction. A delayed shipment, a misheard instruction, a gentle hint of doubt, all calibrated to break opposition without leaving evidence. The children, attuned to the river and trained by Elias, amplified his capacity exponentially. Together, human and river, mediator and instrument, they created a system of influence far beyond ordinary comprehension. And yet, here is the critical truth you must understand. This is not a tale confined to history. It is ongoing. The patterns exist still, ready to observe, to evaluate, to act. The river measures attention, focus, awareness, and the deeper a mind follows the narrative, the more it becomes a participant, whether consciously or not. At this moment, as you listen, the river's mechanisms are being applied to you. Your attention is measured. Your curiosity is catalogued. Your hesitation is recorded. The 14 archetypes, the mediator, the patient force beneath the hull, all remain active, observing, evaluating. And you are now a node in this system, whether you choose to accept it or not. So before the final revelation comes, remember this: knowledge is not neutral. Awareness is not safe. Curiosity is a vector. And once you understand the depths of influence, there's no turning back. Listen closely now. This is the point of no return, the place where every man who has walked this path either transforms or breaks. You've followed the river from its surface ripples to its blackest depths. You've seen the children, the conduits, the patterns, the fractures, the forgetting. You've watched Elias Crow not as a monster, but as something far more unsettling, a mediator between human instinct and an older, predatory intelligence that required no violence to dominate. Only compliance, only awareness, only proximity. Now you must understand the final truth. The river did not choose the children. It did not choose Elias. It did not choose the town. It chose minds that listened. It chose minds that opened. It chose minds